In the previous video, we discussed the social value philosophy of wealth in entrepreneurship. We will discuss this philosophy more in the next video, but before we can proceed, we need to define what we mean by the term social impact. Social impact is a term that has proliferated our culture and media, but it doesn't seem to have a unified definition. Everyone seems to be using it with different meanings and different purposes. To understand how my MBA students think about social impact, I asked this question in my pre-course survey. I give them 9 choices and ask them to choose the one that they think is the best way to measure the social impact of a business in a developing country like India. Notice that the question asks for the best way to measure the social impact of a business. Take a minute to think about this. Which of these do you think is the best way to measure the social impact of a business? Here are the responses from one of my recent MBA classes at IIM Bangalore. 61% of the students thought that social impact is best measured by social upliftment. But then, how do you measure social upliftment? By GDP growth? By the increase in per capita income? By how uplifted people report they feel? Social upliftment is clearly a vague term. Different people will have different interpretations of a vague term like this. 13% of the students thought that social impact is best measured by high governance standards. But governance standards is again a vague term that has different meanings, ranging from holding the CEO responsible to the shareholders, to transparency in reporting financial results, to having strong risk management protocols in place, and more, depending on whom you ask. So once again, how do you measure governance standards? And if you cannot easily measure governance standards, how can they be a good measure of something else? 4% of the students thought that a business cannot have any social impact unless it operates in small towns where it presumably works with poor people. And another 6% thought that a business cannot have any social impact unless it operates in healthcare, education, or agriculture. Why did students think this? Probably because there is a prevailing perception in our culture that social impact is impact on poor people. Do you also think this? That social impact is impact on poor people and not on the middle class or the rich? Why? Aren't the rich and the people in the middle class part of society? This definition of social impact has an even bigger problem. Suppose you were a young entrepreneur building microprocessors in the 1970s, or networking hardware in the 1990s, or smartphone applications in the 2000s. All your early users would have been rich businesses or well-off individuals. So if you believed that social impact was impact on poor people alone, then you could have concluded that you were not creating any social impact. And anyone who was even running a small school in a village was creating more social impact than you were. And if you were someone with firm convictions, you may have wanted to quit your current endeavors to relocate to a village and try and create social impact. But today, those same microprocessors, networking hardware, and smartphone applications allow everyone, including poor people, free communication with WhatsApp or WeChat, free entertainment with YouTube or TikTok, free navigation with Google Maps, free access to knowledge with Google, Bing, and Yahoo, and hundreds of other products and services that make everyone's life better. Yes, these innovations also improve the lives of poor people today, sometimes to a deeply meaningful degree. Therefore, defining social impact as impact on poor people alone is a harmful idea that can mislead young people. It is far better to define social impact literally as impact on all society, which is impact on everyone, and an additional benefit of defining social impact as impact on everyone is that with this definition, it becomes quite easy to measure the social impact of any business. Let's take the example of a hypothetical restaurant and try to think about the impact this restaurant creates in a day in the life of everyone who interacts with it. And let's think about impact that is measurable as well as impact that cannot be measured. I will simplify this example quite a lot so we can understand the core of the argument without getting lost in minor details. Let's begin with the restaurant's customers. How can we measure the impact that a restaurant creates on a customer's life? How about the amount the customer pays to the restaurant? If a customer chooses to pay $15 for a meal at a restaurant instead of going to a different restaurant or eating at home, isn't the customer herself valuing the impact of the meal on her life at least at $15? Otherwise, had the meal been more expensive than its possible impact, she would have chosen to eat elsewhere or at home. So, if our hypothetical restaurant serves 300 customers in a day and charges $15 on average per customer plus 10% sales tax, then the measurable impact that the restaurant has on its customers' lives is $4,500 plus $450 of sales tax collected. Notice that the $15 the customer paid was at least as much as the meal's impact on her life. It is possible that the customer would have been happy to pay even $20 or $25 for the same meal, because the impact of the meal on her life may have been more than the price of $15. But there is no easy way to measure how much more a customer would have been willing to pay for the same meal. Economists call this unmeasurable part of impact the consumer surplus. Now, in rare cases, it may be possible that the customer really does not have a choice. Maybe if the government has made it illegal to cook at home, for example. In such cases, this method of measuring the restaurant's impact on the customer would not work well. There are a few more cases when this method fails, and I will talk about them in the next video. But as long as the customer has a choice in parting with her money, this method of measuring the social impact of a business would work well. Next, how can we measure the impact of the restaurant on its employees? Again, how about the amount the restaurant pays to an employee as salary? If the employee is voluntarily spending her time working for the restaurant in exchange for receiving a salary, what she receives is exactly the impact that the restaurant creates on her life. This again assumes that the employee has a choice, without a gun put to her head, to quit and work elsewhere if the restaurant pays her less than what she can earn by working somewhere else. And in a typical restaurant, employee salaries are about 1/3 of revenue, so about $1,500 in our example. Notice again that other than their salaries, the employees may also get to improve their skills as a result of their work if the restaurant is run well. And the effect of this skill improvement may or may not have been accounted for in the employee salaries. If it isn't accounted for, its impact would be hard to measure. Next, the impact of the restaurant on all its suppliers can similarly be measured by the total amount that the restaurant pays to its suppliers. Why? Because the supplier is supplying its goods to the restaurant voluntarily. It is free to supply these goods to other people if the restaurant is not giving it a good deal. In a typical restaurant, the total purchases are also about 1/3 of revenue, about $1,500 in our example. Similarly, the impact of the restaurant on its landlord can be measured by the total rent that the restaurant pays, because the landlord has the choice to evict the restaurant and rent the place to somebody else if the restaurant is not giving the landlord a good deal. For a typical restaurant, rent is again about 1/3 of revenue, so about $1,500 in our example. Next, the impact that the restaurant creates on its owner or shareholders can be measured by the profit that they receive from the restaurant, because they also have the choice to wind up the restaurant and do something else. In a typical restaurant, profit is about 1% of revenue, about $45 in our example. Finally, the impact of the restaurant on all other people, who are represented by the interactions of the restaurant with the government. The impact of the restaurant on the government is the total sales tax and the total income tax that the government receives, which in our example are $450 and $11. Taxes are designed to account for public goods like roads, infrastructure, and security that the restaurant uses, as well as to set off externalities that the restaurant creates on others, externalities like pollution. So what is the total social impact of the restaurant? We can just sum up all the rows here, and we will realize that the total social impact in our hypothetical example is about 2.2 times the revenue of the restaurant. Now you may think that the assumptions of choice here are flawed. For example, you may be living in a city that has strict rent controls, and the landlord may not really have a choice about their tenant. However, for a broad belief system level framework, if you believe that most people in your city are making economic choices and are not being physically coerced by others, then this result should describe your reality well. You may also think that some of the assumptions in this calculation are too simplistic and you want to do a more thorough job. If so, please go ahead and do it, and you may arrive at a number that is different from 2.2. The exact number you get does not matter for a belief system framework. What matters is the realization that the social impact of our hypothetical restaurant would be proportional to its revenue, which means that social impact is some constant multiplied by the restaurant's revenue. If you break down the stakeholders of any business and perform a similar calculation, you should receive a similar result. The social impact of any business is proportional to its revenue. Does this surprise you a little bit? That the social impact of a business can simply be measured by its revenue? Not by social upliftment, not by governance standards, not by some complex scorecard, but simply by revenue? But it should not surprise you. Businesses exist only to serve customers. So it is natural that the social impact that a business creates will be proportional to the impact it has on its customers. Everything else in a business depends upon the value the business creates for its customers. Only if you create value for your customers do you get a chance to create value for your employees, your suppliers, your landlord, your creditors, your shareholders, and the government. The important takeaway here is to understand that the social impact of a business is not the charity that the business does. Charity is for individuals. Customer service is for businesses. If you internalize this framework that all the social impact of a business originates from its customers, you will find it easier to save yourself from middleman propaganda. This is propaganda by middlemen, like local retailers being disrupted by e-commerce or taxi medallion owners being disrupted by Uber and others. Usually the origin of such propaganda is disruption caused by consumer choice. Because consumers choose to buy from e-commerce players rather than local retailers, or because consumers choose to use Uber rather than radio taxis, middlemen often demonize the e-commerce player or the cab aggregator. Finally, does this mean that all businesses have positive social impact? Haven't there been businesses that have done more harm than good? In the next video, we will see under what conditions this framework may not hold true. Hey there, I'm KJ Saxena, founder of Relentless VC. The video you just watched is part of the Venture Capital and Entrepreneurship specialization, which is available absolutely for free on relentless.ventures. Go check it out. If you're a tech startup founder and want to raise money from us, you should apply on our website. Lastly, if you like this video, do subscribe and share it with your friends.